Awesome. Well, thank you again for all taking the time out of your Monday morning during finals week. I am very excited to be kind of wrapping up everything that I've been working on over the past year. And I would first off want to thank Professors Must and Albert for really taking the time working with me all throughout the year and offering some incredible advice, having some fun with it along the way, getting some of those jokes in too about the whole project. But I really enjoyed working on this, and I don't think it would have been possible to be where I'm at with that without them. And then, in addition, all the professors, all of you that are here from McCormack, and my parents that have really provided a lot of support and taught me a lot along the way in all different areas. So what I'll get into here is I titled it Maximizing Polar Park and Redeveloping Worcester, Making the Most of a New Ballpark. So we're going to start off a little bit more with the focus on the economic research as a whole. So looking at what the economists are saying, their general feelings and findings, some success and failure stories, and then what they have for their recommendations. And then I'll dig into Worcester and the Red Sox there, the Woo Sox as they're called, Polar Park and the Canal District, which is the neighborhood within Worcester that the Woo Sox will be playing. We'll look at their lease and future plans there, the relationship with city leadership that's been a key part of that partnership, and then the community initiatives. And then at the end, I'll come together with some recommendations for future success that'll be a little more Worcester based, but will really be able to be translated to just about any ballpark project or really any team that has a relationship because they're in that city. So looking first at the economic impact, it's often found from these economists that there's a negative or negligible impact. They focus really on the ballpark and stadium, so they're not looking at what goes on in the neighborhoods around or different events beyond the baseball. They're really just looking at how much money is going into the project and then what comes out of it. And I think that's really interesting to note because there's not too much that goes on within the ballpark other than those events, and you really can't create that positive impact without considering everything else that goes around. And I'll really dig into why that's important in Worcester later. In addition, there's the monopolistic leverage of teams. These teams are in a closed league structure. They have all the power. They can threaten to leave whenever they want. And it forces these cities to pay a lot more in public subsidies than they probably would want to if that wasn't the case. And it often leads to a public funding of a stadium's arms race. We see it mostly in college football, where these different colleges, Clemson just built a crazy one for their recruits for football. And we often see that these areas, whether it be the colleges for that or cities for these stadiums and ballparks, spending a lot more money than, again, they probably want to or probably should because they have that fear of losing the team, or they want to make sure that they can keep the team, things along those lines. And in addition, there's a lot of different techniques. I think every work that I read had a slightly different way, whether or not they were getting to the same end goal. They had a different way of talking about how they were getting to what this quote unquote economic impact is. So it's important to note that there really is no one defined way yet. So looking at the economic impact, these analyses are always very optimistic. They often end up being nowhere near what the city and teams say that they'll be. And I think that's interesting because obviously the people involved in the project are going to be optimistic. They're going to say a lot of things are going to happen, but these economists, and again, there's a lot of bias from the economist point of view, so take everything with a grain of salt, but they often say that these things don't end up being nearly as favorable as they want to be. Coates and Humphreys really focused on this in their work. And Andrew Zimbalist also focused on the results of the impact area, where the TIF zone, I'll get into that later, that's a huge part of what's going on in Worcester. But this impact area that they say is going to create the revenues, create the funds to then pay off the project over time, really isn't necessarily as great as they often think it is. And lastly, redistribution, where fans or people that are coming to the ballpark or the stadium are spending money that they likely would have just spent elsewhere. And that's not creating this net new spending. It's not going to create an economic impact if they're just moving from a neighborhood over and spending money in the same way that they would have without anything different because of the ballpark. Now, one piece of work that I found really interesting was Nola Aga, who's actually a McCormack alum. And she focused on how minor league ballparks often have higher economic impacts. She discussed how they minimize leakage and redistribution. And a lot of this is because they're focused more on smaller communities and smaller cities. They're going to be in these smaller, not necessarily state capitals, don't have as many people, not as much going on. And it allows for higher visitor spending because these people are coming for the games and they're being involved. They're going out to the local neighborhoods, finding ways to do that. So in Worcester in particular, this is important because Worcester is smaller. It's a big city. I believe it's the second largest city in New England, but it's still smaller than, say, Boston. There's not necessarily as much going on that allows for this to really organically grow and happen. Now, looking at some of the not so good, as I like to call it, is we talked about this leverage that leads to high public subsidies, and teams have the threat of relocation because of the closed league structure. New teams just can't be created out of thin air. And it really creates this focus on cities need to create these huge, massive deals in order to lure in these teams or keep these teams because they're convinced they have to comply or else they're going to lose the team. And that, honestly, from a political lens, is not very great for those city leaders. They don't want the issues of losing the teams. Fans are called fans for a reason. They're fanatics, and they're going to be really connected to the team, and losing that would be detrimental to the city and to everything going on there. And then also to the politicians. A lot of them would likely lose their job if they lose the team that is so important to that city. One example of a city that had a lot of trouble early on with their project was the Atlanta Braves. They built their new ballpark in Cobb County in 2013, and the county at the time agreed to pay over $300 million, which in and of itself is a lot of money. And that totaled up to about $8.67 million per year over 30 years because of the taxes that are going to need to be spent and the bonds that they took out. And as a result, they had to create brand new taxes just for this project. And they had to create a financing district because the one they originally created wasn't working nearly as well as they wanted it to. And what they did was they ended up laying off teachers and public servants, which is not a good thing. Those are people that are very important to the community, very important to everything going on. And it also took away from public services. They wanted to build a library, but they didn't have the funds to do it because everything that they were collecting in revenues throughout the city, throughout the county, was going to pay for this ballpark, which is an issue. And that's why a lot of these economists look at a lot of these situations. They look at these really negative projects and see that there's those negative results. Another very prominent example is the Miami Marlins. The Marlins built this ballpark in 2012, and Miami-Dade County agreed to pay over $400 million, so even more than what happened in Atlanta. And they utilized bonds. Their total payments were $1.18 billion through 2048. And with inflation and taxes and interest rates, those costs have now risen to over $2 billion. So that's going to be a huge burden, not just now for the county and for the city, but over time. I mean, that's going out to almost 2050, almost 40 plus years. And that's going to really affect the city, affect the county. And we've already seen it, that it affects other projects. The Dolphins were trying to build a new stadium, and it really affected their plans and what they could get in terms of public funding on that end because of what happened with the Marlins. Looking more at a minor league baseball lens, we see the Dunkin' Donuts Park in Hartford, home of the Yard Goats, which is a minor league baseball team. And when they were building their ballpark, they had construction delays. And this was a worry of mine last semester in particular when I was looking at the Woo Sox, because these construction delays, A, cost them over $25 million more than they were originally planning, and B, it was all publicly financed and forced the team to play the entire inaugural season on the road. Because of the COVID pandemic, I was worried that something along these lines was going to happen, and luckily, that isn't the case. They have been able to play baseball and they're getting ready for opening day. But this was important for Hartford, where that's a big hit for the team to A, that's not great for the players to have to play an entire season on the road, especially in minor league baseball, not a necessarily great life to be living. But I think too, it hurt the team in the city because they lose a year of revenues and they lose a year of getting fans into the ballpark and showing off what they've done and being able to collect all those profits and revenues. What is interesting to note, though, with this project is years down the line now, it is seen as successful since it's been completed. If you really take that first year out, a lot of economists actually speak highly of it. The team and city are very happy with how everything happened. Obviously, that first year wasn't great, but it does seem to be successful since then. So now switching a little bit more to the highly successful. The Mark Rosentraub is one of the economists that really focuses on this. And he has his quote unquote major league winners. And these winners are what he sees as the successful projects for everything. He has three major works. He has major league losers, and then he switches to major league winners before going to reversing urban decline, where he kind of culminates everything that he's been working on. And that was actually the work that I really focused on for this. And he talked about how the redevelopment needs to be the focus. What goes on in the neighborhood surrounding the ballpark and everything that's happening there is what's truly important in creating these revenues, creating the economic impact that's going to happen. And then in addition, these psychic benefits, those things that can't be given a number, they can't be given a dollar value, because it's just the pride that the residents and that the city has in having the team there, having the ballpark, and all those things that happen, the excitement that aren't necessarily going to be there if the team's not there, but can't be quantified. So I think that's important to note, especially looking at why these economists maybe have a more negative view. And in addition, he discusses the uniqueness of each project. The ballpark and team have to represent the city. They're built into the neighborhood, which is a very key piece of information for Worcester. And I'm going to talk about Petco Park in San Diego shortly. And that's really important in being a part of the neighborhood and allowing kind of the flow of traffic and the flow of people walking in and out of the ballpark to then be going out to all these different areas around the ballpark. So looking at Petco Park in San Diego, this is actually built by the same team that's building Polar Park. Larry Lucchino, Jenna Marie Smith, and Dr. Charles Steinberg, all of whom I was fortunate to interview for this project. But they were really the driving force behind everything that's happened in San Diego that's really been very successful. It's highly touted by a lot of these economists and a lot of people within the baseball world. And what they did was they created the ballpark district where they focused on this redevelopment. Again, they used TIF financing, which I'll get into shortly, but they created a neighborhood that is now a bustling downtown. It's really important to San Diego that the downtown area has really moved to this ballpark district around the ballpark. And there's a lot of nightlife, there's residential areas, and it's allowed them to really be successful. And especially now that the team is kind of making that turn and being a little more successful on the field, I think it's only going to bring future success there as well. And in addition, there was a strong partnership between the team and the city that allowed for all this to happen, allowed for it to happen successfully. And I believe that's still strong over there from everything I've heard. So now, kind of wrapping up what I saw in my literary research was some recommendations for success. Mark Rosentraub ended his works by talking about the redevelopment, that connection to neighborhood that I just talked about. But he also mentioned that they need to unify public and private capital. The teams have to have skin in the game in this. They need to be paying for part of the project. They need to understand how they have a role in collecting the revenues and making sure that everything in the redevelopment is happening. And then they also need to level the negotiating table. There is that leverage that I discussed earlier. It's really important that they recognize that from both the team and the city side to understand that a fair deal needs to be made in order for things to really be successful down the line. Sparrow and Chalop also wrote an article about these recommendations for success. Again, these are a little more broad that can be applied to hopefully any project, but they discussed the creating economic leverage, which really goes along those similar lines of what I was just saying. They also talked about leveraging place marketing, which is really focused on connecting to the brand of the city and utilizing kind of everything that's already happening in the city or things that are happening maybe even because of the team. And then also leveraging social welfare, focusing on the community relationships, working with businesses, working with nonprofits, and working with the residents to create events, partnerships that are going to be useful for the community and building everything that's going on there. So now, what is tax increment financing? I'm going to call this TIF financing throughout. It's really important. It's also known, especially in Massachusetts, they call it district increment financing. But if I say TIF, it all means the same thing here. So what this is they highlight an area around the ballpark. They'll set a baseline for these revenues based on this area. It's usually the neighborhood that the ballpark's in where redevelopment is all going to be taking place and things will be happening, whether it be creating residential areas or parking or hotels, really everything along those lines that'll be revenue generating down the line. This baseline usually comes from before the ballpark is built so that they can look at what really changed once the ballpark came in. What were the things that were added? What are the new revenues that are being realized? And then anything above this baseline will then be used through taxes from these revenues to pay off the public subsidies. So these taxes are used, but it's important to note that there are no new additional taxes that are created. This is key, especially in Worcester. They've made this a huge point in their deal, but no new taxes if all goes well. This doesn't always occur, but if all goes well, no new taxes will be created. And for Worcester, this is that Canal District, the neighborhood right around Polar Park. There is a lot of skepticism of the TIF zones, and a lot of them look at the size, where they think there's a lot of optimism bias that the size is either too big or too small, or they think they're going to realize more revenues than they actually will. And that's important to note because there is that the team and city, A, might not know necessarily as much, and B, you can't predict the future. We've seen that, especially over the last year and a half with COVID, that there's just so many unknowns and things can change so quickly. So it's important to note that this isn't necessarily going to all happen exactly how they want it to, and it really never will, to be honest. And there's also that impact if expected tax increases don't occur. The Center in Louisville really saw this, where they had a shortfall in projections of what they expected revenues to be within the TIF zone. And this led to them having to tighten the zone because they had made it way too large and it just wasn't capturing everything that they really needed it to, what was directly related to the arena. But they also had to extend their payments out, which meant they were paying more and they were paying over a longer period of time, all because of this optimism bias, because they weren't fully prepared when they made their TIF zone. So now getting into a little bit what I did more so this semester with Worcester. So to give a little background about myself, I've been fortunate to work with the team for about the past 4 years, if you include my first year working concessions. But I was fortunate to have interned with them for 2 full summers and then stayed connected over the past summer as well, and really build up some relationships that I think allowed me to have some conversations and get some inside knowledge that I wouldn't have been able to get otherwise. So I started off using this literature that I just discussed to develop this understanding of everything, see the economist perspective, which again, often very negative. So I'm taking that with a grain of salt and trying to figure out how we can make that more positive, and then focusing really on the success stories, those broad recommendations that I just touched upon, and then using Worcester as a case study. For me, it was the ideal timeline with construction. Ballpark was literally being built as I was working on this. So day by day, I was seeing things come out. I know even just now, I just saw an article come to my inbox from the Worcester Telegram about opening day tomorrow. So this timeline was really great. Although, like I mentioned, because opening day is tomorrow, I wasn't able to have some of the individuals that I was hoping to be here listening today, but looking forward to passing this along to them after the fact. So once they get a little breath of fresh air after the ballpark's fully built and everything's going on there, they can listen. So what I really did this semester was I completed interviews. Those individuals from the Woo Sox that I will discuss throughout. I'm very fortunate to have taken the time of a lot of the high up officials from Larry Lucchino, Dr. Charles Steinberg, Jana Marie Smith, Dan Ray, and some other individuals from the team. And in addition, I spoke with a gentleman from the city government. He's the chief of staff of Worcester city manager. And then I also got an outside perspective from within Worcester. I spoke with a couple of gentlemen from the Worcester Regional Research Bureau, and they provided a great perspective from people within the city, but that weren't directly related to the project. So you'll see some quotes throughout there, but I'm grateful for the time that they spent with me to sit down and answer some questions and help me pull out some major themes. So this move was originally made in 2017. The move was announced. Again, I was fortunate to actually have been in this meeting. So it's been really cool to kind of see every bit and piece as I've gone through the process. But Worcester beat out Pawtucket and Providence. Pawtucket, I won't get into what went on over there, but let's just say there were some issues behind the scenes that not part of this project, so I'm not going to dig into, but Worcester also beat out Providence. And what was really important was this deal was focused on the redevelopment of the Canal District. As I was discussing, redevelopment is really important in building everything from the ground up and ensuring that those revenues are brought in. So you can kind of see in this picture here from early on, there's a lot going on right around the ballpark, and things are going to be coming up even more so in the future. So Polar Park, I think I want to start off a little bit with this quote from Dr. Charles Steinberg, who's the Woo Sox president, that he said, "Worcester is about to enter the national sports vocabulary." That was something that really stuck out to me because I think it's important to note, like, if you're watching a Dodgers game in California and the announcer says, "Oh, and this so-and-so was just called up from Worcester," people are going to be talking about Worcester in ways that they haven't talked about in the past because of this, having this team. And it's a AAA team. They're prominent. There's a lot going on over there. People know. And I think that's going to be really important to see there. So some of the original cost projections, a lot of this has changed, which I'll touch upon shortly. But the original cost projections were about $99.4 million for the ballpark and about $29 million to acquire the land. This project did include infrastructure plans such as Kelly Square and Pickett Plaza, which I'll show later. And most importantly, it was a joint partnership. There was both sides had skin in the game, and the city is paying through general obligation bonds, which they'll be able to pay off through any revenues that they can generate over the next 30, 35 years, mostly through those TIF payments that I was discussing. And then in addition, the team paid $6 million up front right at the beginning, and will pay 30 to 35 annual payments, depending on kind of how the lease wraps up. And they'll also be responsible for any cost overruns. Now, both sides constantly state that no new taxes will be used and the ballpark will pay for itself. I think that's important to note. I think the redevelopment will play a big role in this, but all of the things that I'm going to talk about really need to happen to make sure that this can happen and that no new taxes will be created, that the public funds won't be used for more than what they already are being used for. And I think that's going to be key here. Now, looking back, some of those economists that I touched upon earlier still maintain their sentiment, even about this project. A lot of them were still very hesitant, especially because of the pandemic with so many unknowns on that side of things. But a lot of them focused with the spot of optimism being the redevelopment. They liked that redevelopment was such a key part of this project, and they were focused on what's going to happen outside of the ballpark. And that's going to be really important in kind of reversing these trends. One person that really shifted course, so to say, is Andrew Zimbalist. He was an economist, had similar views as everybody else. And it's important to, again, take this with a grain of salt, as he was hired by Worcester as a project consultant. So a lot of the things that he talked about of why redistribution surpluses were overstated, or why the project is going to work better than some in the past, may have some bias behind it because he's working directly on the project. But I also think it's interesting to see from the economist perspective why it might be a little more successful than anybody else. And it was something that I really considered as I was doing my research, trying to understand why he maybe said some of the things he did where he hadn't said those same things in the past about different projects. And overall, this really highlights the need to spur economic activity, focus on generating those revenues through the ballpark district, and finding ways to have more than just baseball, which baseball is a given, although we've seen after the last year, maybe it's not a given. We can't really take anything lightly just because things can be taken away, but it's important to create this economic activity through all different types of events and things going on around the ballpark. So this ballpark, I'll be honest, I think it's beautiful. I'm very excited to go see it in person tomorrow. It was built by this highly successful team of surefire Hall of Famers that I mentioned. And as per usual with their works, it's going to be a classic ballpark with modern day amenities. We saw this first with Camden Yards in Baltimore. And you can really see it kind of has that traditional look to it. But when you look at everything going on, it's going to be as good as any modern day brand new ballpark. They have everything considered. And I'm very excited. You'll see there's some details here and there that are just incredible, really showed the connection to the city. The ballpark itself will have a capacity of 9,508, which for those of you that are local to the area, 508 is the area code. So that's something that, again, just shows the connection. They understand the importance of Worcester. I thought that was funny to see. That was a Dr. Charles Steinberg. He really focused on that. That was one of his favorite things. And what's interesting here is they're only going to have about 6,500 hard seats. There's going to be areas to walk around. You can kind of see it's an open concourse all around the ballpark. So these will all be standing room only areas. If you're going to get your hot dog, you can still see the game going on in the fields. And they're going to have a lot of group areas too. That's been a real big focus in minor league baseball as of late, because groups come out to games and want to do all sorts of things. So this allowed them to do that in all different capacities. They'll have their suites, which you can kind of see a few peeking out over here. And then the DCU club, which will be back here. That'll be that more premium area where fans can go inside. There'll be an area for food, whatever, if areas to hang out, that'll be specific to individuals with the DCU club seats. And then they can also go outside and watch the game as well from right behind home plate. Now, this Worcester touch is something that was really key to this whole project. One of the things that Larry Lucchino said when I interviewed him, but also in a lot of the articles I read, Larry is the chairman of the board for the Woo Sox. He's been involved with the Red Sox and all those projects that I discussed upon earlier that honestly are all seen as very successful. And he said here he wants it to look, taste, feel, and smell like Worcester. And I think he said any other senses you want to throw on there can fit too. But we can really see that already firsthand through just the logo, this Smiley Ball logo and the mascot as well. The Smiley Ball face was created by Harvey Ball in Worcester. So this was something that was important to them when they created the logo, again, making that connection there. Woo Blue was something they created. The blue that you'll see all throughout the ballpark, this was the name given to it to have that Worcester feel, that Worcester connection, make it something different rather than just saying, oh, everything's just blue. This seat design here, you'll recognize this logo. The team name for this from the National League in 1880 was the Worcester Worcesters. Yes, that's real. I know that was a funny point of conversation with Professors Must and Albert, but you'll see that logo in a real pamphlet in a second and then my next slide. But that's on every single seat. So again, that shows the connection there. And then lastly, these heart-shaped lights here. Worcester is the heart of the Commonwealth, and they really wanted to make that focus. So these are the light structures. They're all shaped like hearts. Again, a small little touch there that didn't necessarily need to be done, but shows the connection to the city. So now there is a lot of history of baseball in Worcester. Even though they haven't had a professional team in a few years, there is that connection. You can see here the Worcester Worcesters. There's that logo again. And they had a minor league team as early as the 1870s. And then the Worcesters joined the National League in 1880. So they've had professional baseball. This has been a point of pride for the city for a long time. There's a lot of talent that comes out of Worcester, specifically ex-MLB player and now Woo Sox hitting coach Rich Gedman is from Worcester himself. They have competitive junior leagues, development facilities that are breeding the next generation of MLB players. And there really just is a true love of baseball from those playing, but also from the residents that are really excited. We saw that when they were making their pitch and really trying to get the then Paw Sox to come to Worcester. So looking a little bit more at the unique features of the ballpark, the first thing is they're going to have their own version of Jersey Street like Fenway has through Summit Street. This will be a street kind of along the outfield lines that's going to be closed off on game days, but it will be open to the public on general days. And this is going to have a duck boat from World Series parades. So again, just a nice little touch there. They're going to have a diner that's going to bring in local restaurants to be able to sell their food on game days. And it's just going to be a nice spot for fans to kind of hang out, but again, be able to come up and see the ballpark even on non-game days. The DCU Plaza, which is over here on the right, is kind of that main entrance. You can see the team stores here, the ticket booth, and then they have these giant World Series rings from each of the 4 most recent World Series. And it shows that these players are really going. The next step is to go to the Red Sox and to hopefully get a few of these rings themselves. So it's showing kind of what's going on in Worcester and why it's such a prominent baseball league and a prominent baseball team. The Worcester wall here will kind of look familiar to some of you that are Red Sox fans, although it is in right field instead of left field. But what was interesting with this when I was talking to Jen and Marie Smith is that it was really kind of what the ground gave, where they really had to work with the hills of the area and they wanted everybody to be able to enter at grade level. So no matter where you walk into the ballpark, you're going to be walking. You don't have to go up or down a flight of stairs. You're going to be right there. You can do a 360 all around the ballpark and be out on a street wherever you leave. So that's kind of what allowed for this wall to be in right field, but it also kind of continued that touch a little bit from Fenway, from the big league club. And lastly, as I mentioned, there are a lot of party spaces, standing room area, only areas that'll kind of allow for that minor league baseball feel that's so important. Worcester truly provided a unique opportunity where they had this giant plot of land that had really just been vacant for 40 years, as Jake Sanders, who's the chief of staff of the office of the city manager, said. It's a truly up and coming community in not just the Canal District, but Worcester as a whole. There's a lot going on over there. I mean, I'm only 22 years old, but I've already kind of seen it over these past few years going out to the city that there's just things popping up left and right, and people are moving into the city, and there's this true organic growth. People are really moving out there, and it's a way to be in a city, but not necessarily paying Boston rents or anything like that. But it's still a really important city, and being in the heart of the Commonwealth, it provides a lot of great locations, but also ways to kind of do a lot of different things and get out to a lot of different areas. And again, this redevelopment is going to be key throughout this project. From the beginning, there was really unified support from everybody involved in this project. It started with 10,000 letters being written to ownership from fans. They put this together where it was just people talking about why they wanted the then Paw Sox to come out to Worcester. In addition, the city officials, some of which you can see in this photo, were all on board from the very beginning. Even Lieutenant Governor vouched for how she really wanted the team to come out to Worcester. And Larry Lucchino had touched upon how he thought the Achilles heel would be the business community. He was worried that they weren't going to have the resources and the organizations that would provide what they need in the minor league team. And the city brought this immediately. We saw it with Polar Beverages, which obviously being Polar Park has the naming rights deal there, but also Table Talk Pies and Wormtown Brewery and a lot of those different restaurants that are very prominent to Worcester and to Worcester's history that all came out to support and are founding partners of the Woo Sox. So what's in the lease? It's a 35-year partnership, and there's a focus on events, not just baseball, as I said, but beyond that. It's going to be things as small as meetings within the suites to as big as a festival that maybe goes out to the entire Canal District. And the city also has their own days where they can come in and have events and put on revenue generating events that they're going to run themselves. Within the ballpark, the team will keep their revenues as is expected, but outside of the ballpark, there's going to be a 50-50 revenue split. Any signage or anything, events that go on outside of the ballpark will be split between the team and the city, which honestly isn't often seen. So this was a welcome sight when I was reading through the lease. There's also a huge community focus, making sure that the team is connected to the community, working with local organizations, local nonprofits, connecting to the residents, which I think is really going to be a nice thing, a nice touch to everything. They don't necessarily have to do that, but that was important to them in Pawtucket, and I know it'll continue to be so here. And then lastly, this ballpark capital committee, that's going to be a joint partnership between the team and the city to work on any repairs or any updates that need to be brought to the stadium, where they're going to be working hand in hand rather than one side just doing it on their own. So now some payments here, a little more tedious, so I won't spend too much time on this end. But the ballpark, as of right now, is going to cost around $157 million, which makes it the most expensive minor league ballpark. That's important to note. It's a large number from the minor league side, but I think because of the plans going in, this is something that can work out and can still be successful even with that high number. The city is going to be responsible for about $88 million, which are going to be paid off through those general obligation bonds, mainly through the TIF financing that I talked about. Parking is actually all going to be city revenues. This is something that has been a point of emphasis kind of over the last few months, and they just released their parking plan recently, but the city is going to have a lot of city-owned lots that'll be keeping the revenues, even though it's individuals coming out to Polar Park for Woo Sox games. So that was another welcome sight for me as I was reading through the lease. The team is also responsible for about $60 million. This is going to be paid through yearly payments throughout the lease through ticket fees, which as of right now, I believe are about $2 per ticket. And these payments are going to increase over time. They start off smaller so that the team and the city can kind of get their feet underneath them, and then they'll increase to account for inflation, but also generating more and more revenues over time. And as I mentioned earlier, the team is responsible for any cost overruns. Anything that's added, specifically more so over these next few months, will be paid for by the team. And again, this was a huge point of emphasis, so I just want to say it again, but they really do stress no new taxes are going to be created. The ballpark is going to pay for itself, even with these higher numbers. So I think that's something we'll see over the years down the line, but a little more optimistic, I think, than when I first started doing this research because of the individuals I've talked to, what they've said, and what I've read behind the scenes as well. So now switching a little bit more to the redevelopment, looking at the Canal District, there were some early projections of about $101 million that would go into this. And again, this is going to be very important for the TIF plans. This is where the revenues are truly going to be generated, how those payments are going to be made. They have a plan for a left field office building, which I'm excited that'll provide some really cool views of the stadium, of the ballpark, and will also allow for, office space, but they can have retail areas. They can maybe make it some apartment living if that's what's needed at the time. And then in addition, throughout the Canal District, they're going to have hotels, they're going to have residential, lab space, retail, everything you can imagine. Some of those things are already popping up, and there are plans for a lot more over these next few years as well. And Jenna Marie Smith said to me that the ballpark brings it with the natural development that was baked into the formula. This was an important part from the very beginning of this project and is going to be key for the future as well. Polar Park is truly a piece of the larger puzzle. I heard that in a few of my interviews, and I really like it, where Jake Sanders said there's a three-party master plan. The Woo Sox are working with the city, and then Madison Properties was kind of the building constituent from all of these projects. And they're joining a community that's already on the rise, as I mentioned. There's already a lot going on. And as Anthony Cahill, who's the director of ticket sales and strategy, said, I don't think Worcester needs the Red Sox, meaning the Woo Sox, and that is a good thing. And I think what's important to note there is that there's already a lot happening, and Worcester would be successful even without the Woo Sox, but now the Woo Sox can come in and build upon what's already there and create further success. That wouldn't necessarily be possible, but they can build off of what's already there. They're not starting that chain on their own. This is, again, I want to stress this, really important in all my work, but it's again going to be key for the TIF plans and making those payments over time. And as Steve Oliveira, who's the senior director of marketing programs, said, they want a porous ballpark. They really want people to be able to come in and out, a lot of different things going on, even on non-game days, things are happening, people are coming to the area, and that'll allow for all these things around the ballpark to happen as well. Looking at some of the things beyond the ballpark, these were the really main points of contention before the Woo Sox came in that they wanted to take care of. So Table Talk Pies, their warehouse was directly behind right field, and they're actually going to be really changing that into affordable housing. I think that's great to note because it'll be housing that'll have a set price point. It'll allow a lot of individuals that may not be able to live in Worcester or pay the rent necessarily will be able to live there. But most importantly, Table Talk is still staying in Worcester. They're just going to move to a brand new facility. Jake Sanders made this a point of emphasis when I was talking to him, that they really want to make sure, because of the history of Table Talk Pies, that they stay in Worcester. Also, you can see down here, this was Kelly Square. I know a lot of people have said to me it's the only area that you could find people not on their phones when they were driving because it was just so dangerous. There's so much going on. You can see there's about 15 intersections in one. So what they've done is they've renovated this into a brand new peanut-shaped intersection. that'll hopefully be safer, but allow for a faster flow of traffic, because the ballpark is literally right up here in the top left corner. So if fans aren't able to get in and out, that's going to create a lot of issues. In addition, Pickett Plaza, which you can see the plans for here, this used to be a parking lot out behind left center field and it's going to be changed into a park, a little bit of a plaza area. It'll create some welcome green space within a city, and it'll really allow for, especially non-game days, for families and residents of the area to kind of go out and enjoy some safe outside space. And then in addition, as I talked about, there's a lot of entertainment, residential, hotel, retail spaces. Things are all popping up, and there's a lot of plans for the future there. Now, COVID did have its impacts, as it did with just about everything we've done. And they were forced to halt construction for about 5.5 weeks early on. But all throughout, they remained hopeful and confident that the ballpark would be ready for opening day 2021, whenever that was. And now that we see it, now that it's finally here, we can see that that is the case. There's still a lot of areas that need to be completed, but what needs to be done to play baseball and get some fans in the building is ready to go. This did lead to some cost increases, about $9.5 million. They are going to be covered by the team, as I said, and only $1.62 million was directly related to COVID, as they announced. So I think it's important to see that, I don't necessarily know how that number was brought about, and I'm sure COVID will have many different effects, but that was the number that they gave to it. More importantly, on my end, it delayed and decreased some of the plans. We saw the 2 hotels that were planned for were combined into 1. There's a few less parking garage spaces. And then that left field building, along with a lot of the other, like the laboratory space and some of the other buildings, were delayed by a few years, mostly to 2023 or 2024. But like I said, they are ready for baseball. The ballpark was quote unquote baseball ready as of April. They had players there for the first time on April 1st as part of the alternate training site for the Boston Red Sox. And then the season for the Woo Sox began last Tuesday on May 4th, with opening day being tomorrow. Again, I'm excited to go out there and help out and work and again see this all in person. I'm very excited, and they were able to increase their capacity. The timing worked out perfectly for opening day from 12% to 25%, and the hope is for the future that they'll be able to do these things as well. And sorry, I just saw Professor McKelvey. I just saw your message. Thanks so much for coming. Good luck with your call. Awesome. And then, so kind of getting back, they are ready to go, not just on the baseball team side, but the team itself. They're ready to go. They sold out of their season tickets. They've been selling them now for a few years, and single game tickets just went on sale. They were available to Booster Club members, and they'll open the general public shortly. They have their plans for limited restrictions. They have the partnership with NESN to air some games on TV. If you want to watch it, it's on NESN tomorrow at 3. I know I'm excited to kind of see what goes on there. And then they also have the fan cutouts. They're continuing that. They did make a note that they hope to not have them for very long. They want to be able to remove them throughout the season so they can get more bodies into the ballpark once it's safe to do so. So I think that was great to see. And they're calling it more of a rolling open. This is a phrase Larry Lucchino used, where opening day tomorrow is going to have its feel. It's the inaugural opening day, but they're going to kind of have things that are being completed throughout the season. Then hopefully by the end of August, they can have a nice full ballpark and really celebrate everything that's going on. So looking a little bit at the relationship between the team and the city, this was something that was very surprising in a good way for me as I was doing my research. Dr. Charles Steinberg, who has been involved in many different projects, worked with different teams, different cities, but he said to me, they are the best civic partners I've worked with in my 45 years in baseball. That right there spoke volumes. I think that just shows how great this relationship is and shows what they've done. And organizations across Worcester, be it businesses or nonprofits or kind of the local, like the Worcester Regional Research Bureau that I talked about, they were all saying good things about it. They wanted the team to come, and now that they're there, they're very excited for the future. Jake Sanders said, when we're selling the Worcester Red Sox, we're selling the city of Worcester as well, and vice versa. So they understand their brands are working together, and that can be seen too in this quote from Rob Crane, who's the Senior VP of Sales and Marketing, where he said, I think that they know, and we know, meaning the team in the city, that we couldn't have done this without each other. They understand that this is a joint partnership, and that partnership is going to continue beyond just construction. Kim Miner, who's the Executive Vice President of General Counsel for the team, said it's a long-term relationship you're entering into. It's not like you just shake hands and build a ballpark. There's a lot more that goes into it. They really have to focus on every little detail, and whether it's the neighbors complaining about something and They just have to work together to work that out, or something as big as maybe building a brand new renovation. They're going to have to work together on all of those aspects. There's also a lot of excitement beyond just the city officials and the team. The Worcester gentleman from the Worcester Regional Research Bureau said to me, people coming in now are seeing a different signature scale project side of the city than they would have seen 5 or 6 years ago. That shows that that change is happening. It's been happening. It's going to continue to happen. The team's going to allow that to push forward. A lot of people saw it as the light at the end of the tunnel for the pandemic. There was literally no ballpark. It was a rundown building in an empty parking lot that hadn't done anything as of the start of the pandemic last March. And now we're seeing here, a little more than a year later, there's a beautiful brand new ballpark. And that's seen as a point of pride for a lot of people in the city. The Worcester Regional Chamber of Commerce just put out their yearly Move to Worcester, we're the best city in the world commercial. And they focused on Polar Park, but not just Polar Park, everything that's happening around and throughout Worcester. And there is a lot going on. And as Dan Ray mentioned, the success is really going to come from the shifts of investments, getting people to come from 20 or 30 minutes away that wouldn't necessarily come out to Worcester, looking at the surrounding area, looking at even some of the surrounding states because of the location of Worcester, will create that net new spending that's going to allow for these revenues to be generated and create success. There's also excitement from the residents. It started with those postcards that I touched upon early. They had town halls with all people across the city to generate ideas. I think that's where a lot of like the Woo Blue and getting the seat designs, things like that, a lot of those things likely came from those. They had some major events pre-COVID. This picture is from groundbreaking about 2 summers ago, I believe. You can see just how many people were there, how many people were excited, and that's not even the whole crowd in that picture. They had a red carpet announcement with ex-Red Sox players. They had a planning of the bases, and it's truly seen as a beacon of hope for a lot of these residents. They've wanted a baseball team for a long time, and that excitement is really showing itself now that the team is finally there. Polar Park is going to be more than a ballpark. They want, according to Dan Ray, a very busy and active ballpark year round. They want something where they can have different events going on, new visitors, new demographics more so, where they have different events like they did a Nitro Circus when I was in Pawtucket, that's going to bring in a very different group of people that are going to come out to a baseball game. So attracting those individuals who might fall in love with the area, fall in love with the city, become new fans of the team, hopefully, and then maybe even become new residents if they love the city that much. Rob Crane said to me, when we built this new ballpark, it wasn't just about baseball, it was about the other events and being a civic beacon. That's important there because it shows that they're going to make this a focus in everything they do, but also those psychic benefits, the civic pride, working with the community, making sure it's something that the team, the city, and also the residents are all proud of. They want to work with the already thriving community, work with those individuals, work with those organizations to create this value beyond these economic quantifiable numbers that the economists really focus on. They've already had some community partnerships where we've seen the Junior Woo Sox here. They're a AAU baseball and softball organization that are now going to be wearing the team's name across their chest. They're hosting 2021 high school graduations for the city schools in Polar Park. They've worked with the Worcester Railers, which are an ECHL hockey, minor league hockey team. They've had some joint partnerships there selling memorabilia in the team stores. They have this Woo Sox cap car, which if this doesn't say minor league baseball, I don't know what does. It's about exactly what minor league baseball does. As Kim Miner said, minor league baseball is very much community dependent business. It's all about fun. So being able to drive this around, I read that it is, you can literally drive this on the road so they can bring it to all different events and sell their memorabilia and get themselves into different events that they may not be able to because they have this. They've also had some corporate partnerships. I touched upon earlier that diner on Summit Street. They're going to bring in all of the different local restaurants that'll be able to create diversity. You won't just have your hot dogs and burgers. You'll have maybe some African food or Coney Island hot dogs, things along those lines. And they've also created a partnership with Harvard Pilgrim to grow Woo Sox Farms, which is going to be on top of one of the concourse areas. And they're going to grow fresh fruits and vegetables that they can use in the ballpark and sell to the local community. They have a partnership with UMass Memorial focused on wellness initiatives. They're going to have the post-game run the bases is going to be sponsored by them. And then Hurl to Pearl, which is one of my favorite things working in Pawtucket, where you throw a ball at a car driving around the warning track. If you get it in the sunroof, you win a prize. And all the funds go to a charity. So again, that's working with the local community, local charities there. And then lastly, Fallon Health, again, focus on those wellness initiatives. They're going to sponsor Fun Day Sundays. They're also going to donate to local food banks for every Woo Sox strikeout. So now that we have a full understanding of everything that happened in Worcester, I want to get a little bit into my recommendations for the future. Again, these are going to be Worcester specific. I'm going to touch upon some points that are really related solely to Worcester, but everything can really be taken on a broad sense. And I'll kind of finish with that of how it can be applied to other ballpark projects. My three main themes here are community focus, ensuring redevelopment, and working together. So first, the community focus. It's important that they know the community and that they fit their events and partnerships to that community. They're going to work with the different organizations, specifically in the Canal District, and finding ways to create a sense of what the city and what the neighborhood wants, and finding ways to fit that rather than doing their own things and hoping the city will come or will follow along with it. Larry Lucchino said there's an undeniable sense of pride that Worcester has in this ballpark and is part of the Worcester city life experience. It's important that the team continues to notice this and makes it a point of emphasis to make sure that this remains the case for the next 30, 35, hopefully even longer years. Lastly, here they want to work with local organizations and nonprofits. They can utilize the minor league baseball excitement. People, they're professional baseball players. So getting the players to go out to events, which you really don't see in Major League Baseball, finding ways to bring the cap card to different events and nonprofits. You can't tell me an 8-year-old isn't going to get excited when they see that thing roll up and then want to ask their parents to spend money and buy memorabilia and now go out to games and become a huge fan. So I think that's going to be important there. And two, they need to understand the relationship. The Railers, who I talked about earlier, is the minor league hockey team. They can really work closely with them. They already have, and I think they should continue to do so. Bravehearts are going to be a little more difficult. They're a collegiate baseball team. They've been successful in the past, but they're offering the same product. They're going to be direct competition. The Woo Sox are going to offer a more premium product. So I think it's important for them to note that they may just kind of have to do their own thing and kind of see where things go over the years, but it's going to be hard for them to necessarily work and try to create a partnership with them because in the end, they really are direct competition. However, looking more at the Railers, I do think that they could do a lot of work with them. They could offer where fans can buy a ticket to a Railers game and also to a Woo Sox game. They've already done some things where they have Woo Sox night at a Railers game. They've sold memorabilia within the team stores. So finding ways to create those connections, but then also to build upon what the Railers have already done. They understand the community, they know what works. So using that to their advantage and building on that is going to allow for a seamless transition into the Worcester community. Again, too, they want to open the ballpark year round, having non-baseball events become a focus. They're going to have X amount of baseball games every single year, but then also doing everything else, something as small as a meeting in a suite to as large as a festival or concert that could take place all throughout the Canal District or maybe be a whole Worcester event. This is going to bring in those new demographics that I mentioned, finding ways to keep areas of the ballpark even open on non-game days like they're going to do with Summit Street. That'll allow more than just the few hours that a game is happening for this area to really generate that success. Now, this might be the most important thing. I've talked about it a lot throughout, but ensuring that the redevelopment happens. They have to complete the ballpark district plans. I know COVID played its role on a lot of these things, but long-term, these plans need to be followed up with and followed through with. And that's going to be really important to see, and hopefully even more than what they've already planned for occurs. It's going to be key in reversing the economist doubts, all those numerical things that I talked about early on. If this doesn't happen, I think maybe you'll see the economists come out and say, see, told you so, as they love to do. And it's important too to use the team's brand to attract new projects. They've already done this. We've already seen a few organizations say I'm here because the Woo Sox are coming, but utilizing what they have and what they can offer. And then lastly, the Woo Sox leadership has really done this successfully. They did it well in Pawtucket. They've worked with the community and making sure that this does happen over the next few years. Again, I'll stress this one last time. It's imperative for the TIF payments that this all happens. The only way the ballpark is going to pay for itself. And they really need to realize these expected revenues, which only happen if this redevelopment occurs. It's going to create a business cycle. New fans means more spending. That's net new spending. And it's going to bring more revenues and allow the ballpark to pay for itself and then hopefully even make a profit down the line. So that's what we all want in the end. My last recommendation here is working together. We've seen a very strong relationship between the team and the city, and this needs to be maintained for all aspects. Something as small as a neighbor's complaining about the fireworks to as big as, like I said, a huge renovation that may need to happen down the line. This is a long partnership, hopefully even more than the 30, 35 years from the lease. And it's going to allow for a strong connection to the community. If they understand what the city wants, they work together, then they're going to be able to best fit the community and lead to that success. this was the determining factor from what I saw in the decision to choose Worcester. The city leadership really came in and were combined in all of their efforts to make sure that this was going to be something that the team would be enjoying, but also be successful with. And we've already seen some of the success in the lease, like I talked about. They have the shared revenues, parking is going somewhat to the city. They have events that are going to be city and team focused. So allowing all this to continue to happen, and they're not just, like Kim Miner said, shaking their hands, building a ballpark and saying, see you later. It's a long-term deal. And then just showing how this can be applied to other projects. Obviously, a lot of the details I shared were specific to Polar Park, but as Larry Lucchino said to me, no two cities, no two towns, and no two ballparks should be the same. Everything's going to be different, and you really have to understand the uniqueness and the history of the city, but also the neighborhood that you're in. Jenna Marie Smith said, you have to let the site speak to you and tell you what to do. I like with the Worcester Wall, they really had to build Polar Park directly into the neighborhood based on what they were given. She said to me that even if they moved Polar Park to a different neighborhood within Worcester, it still wouldn't work. So understanding what's going on there and how to apply to directly to the neighborhood and then to the city as a whole to really make sure that you can understand the community, do all of those things for wherever that team may be. And this goes for any team. It doesn't have to be necessarily just a team building a ballpark. These are all things that any team that's been there that has that relationship with the city can use. And then also knowing that not all that success is going to come in year one or even in one specific year. Rob Crane has been involved in 3 of these projects, and he said to me that year one from the other 2 so far hadn't been the best project, the best year. They hadn't seen the most success until year 2 or even later. So understanding that they need to build this sustainability, build this success over time is what's going to be really most important when looking at the bigger picture. Again, I really appreciate you all coming. Thank you again to Professors Muss and Albert for spending so much time and pointing me in the right direction throughout this whole project. I thank you all for coming, and I will stop sharing my screen now. I'm happy to take any questions if anyone has them.
So what would, first, that was great.
Thank you.
Yeah, I know some of what you've done, but seeing it all put together was really good. If you could go back and give advice to Worcester now, knowing all that's happened, everything else, what would you craft in that advice?
Yeah, I think first I'd say don't let a pandemic happen. No, no, from a real aspect, I think the relationship is really important from the early stage, where they were really focused from an early stage. I think, maybe there were some ways to keep some of the costs down and making sure some of that redevelopment maybe even happened prior to. I know I mentioned that a lot of things were happening, but those things that are now being delayed because of COVID, maybe those could have been started early on. And I think too, parking, as they say, doesn't seem to be a huge issue, but I think that's something that could have been a focus. But I think as a whole, really just ensuring that that relationship is going to be important, that they're all combined from all different sides are on the same page and really pointing in the right direction, which I think they are. But I do think there have been some small things that have come out that maybe that was a little more fruitful, a little bit on the side where they were looking at a little more optimistically.
Brian, great job with the presentation. Great job with your semesters of research here. And one thing, if you see folks popping out here, we have another thesis presentation coming up at noon. So don't feel anything about that. But
no worries.
It was a very, I think that you presented, especially the ideal scenario really well here. Now, I'm going to have to ask to play devil's advocate now. So what do you think could be not I want to call it worst case scenario, but how might this not pay for itself, and what might that look like from your perspective?
I think it all goes back to the redevelopment. I think the team is going to do what they're going to do, and they're going to have the events. But if those plans aren't followed through with, if the hotels aren't built, the residential spaces aren't built, they don't lure in the organizations, the businesses, the retail, all that, then those revenues are never going to be realized. And they pushed back a lot of those things, like I said, because of COVID. But if those things don't come over the next few years, then it's going to be really difficult for them to realize the revenues that they said were going to happen. And it's going to end up taking some tax paying dollars from somewhere else, if not creating some new taxes. If I were a betting man, that's what I think would happen. Hopefully it doesn't. I think they are on the right track to make sure it does, but those things really need to happen.
Right, absolutely. Totally agreed.
All right, Brian, it's been a pleasure. I'm going to echo Dr. Delia here and get on to our next honors presentation, but
Yes.
really hope they bring those canals back, right? And we can all get a concert for that game. That's what I'm waiting for. I saw the one rendering and immediately fell in love with that part of the plan. And so great work. I'll see you on Wednesday, right?
Yes. Thank you all for coming. Thank you for the kind words. And yeah, I'll see you all hopefully Wednesday.
Great job, Brian. I'll see you then.
Thank you. And I want to say quick, oh, she just left. I was going to say thank you to Ms. Penta, who helped connect me with a few of those individuals. And Melissa, thank you for coming as well. I hope you enjoyed that.
Absolutely.
Hey, I wanted to say congratulations to your parents. Well done. You guys did a beautiful job of raising Brian. He's been one of our most enjoyable students to work with. I had him in sport leadership, but I know everyone has had a pleasure working with Brian. And probably the only issue is that he probably works too hard and plays too little. So,
well, for what it's worth, we appreciate all you people as well for pushing him and for challenging him and for giving him the opportunity to grow as a person. And it's always been important to us that the people that he interacts with see him for who he could be. And you guys have brought the best out in him. And we're very grateful to UMass and very grateful to you people as individual mentors and professors to him as well. So thank you as well. Great job. Go UMass.
Go UMass.
Yeah, he has truly been awesome. We're lucky to have him, and you must be incredibly proud. I will say, he still has something to deliver from my class. I'm trying to figure out if there's a way that I can make him fail so he has to come back and we get more of him, because selfishly I just want more Brian time. But I don't know. I don't think I'm going to be able to work it. So
I won't go anywhere. I promise. I'll still be around. I'll be out for hockey games, worst case.
There you go. There you go.
Very much for the kind words too. He's been a great kid, and we too sometimes tell him to try to slow down a little or not work so hard, but hasn't worked for 22 years. I don't expect it will for the future. So thank you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Brian, we got to hop in our next one here, but be well, and we'll see you on Wednesday.
Sounds good. Thank you all.
congratulations,
Brian, thank
Brian.
you very much.
Thank you.